at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master, coming at ya, coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster, coming at ya, at ya. Tell you what's master.
Welcome to another episode of Cut the Bull. I am Wilfred Reilly. The big hoss Charles Love is probably going to be joining us in a couple or trace minutes. I am joined, as always, by the talented and lovely Christy Kelly and the lovely and talented Brooks Crenshaw, as well as our guest today, who you probably recognize from the socials as Maia Poet, who obviously does a great deal of discussion in the detransition space, and who's going to talk us through what I think is one of the probably most notable jury or judicial verdicts of the past 20 years, the first big detrans win in court. But before we get into the exact details, Maya, how are you?
Doing fantastic. It's a real honor and pleasure to be on your podcast.
Yeah, I don't know about honor. I mean, we've talked a bunch of times, but it's good to have you on. Like this is our more laid back, less like legalistic sort of forum. But for those who don't know you, Maya, can you break down to the audience who you are, where you come from, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can do that. So my name is Maya. I am 26 years old, and I'm a detransitioner. So for about 12 years of my life, from the ages of 12 to 24, I identified as transgender. And when I began my gender transition, it started out, this whole journey started out, I would say, with the iPad that I got for my 12th birthday in June of 2011. And shortly after I got that iPad, I encountered all these ideas that I found to be pretty interesting, and it seemed to me to explain something almost metaphysical about myself. And kind of when I discovered the transgender framework, it sort of, at least at that time, as a confused autistic 12-year-old, really did like provide some explanatory value, or some explanatory, it had an explanatory capacity in terms of like explaining to me why it was that I was so different from the other girls. And I began biting my breasts while I was still growing. And I say that this would have been around 2011 or 2012. So this whole thing was relatively unknown. And of course, I'll just, fast forward to like 7 or 8 years into this so-called gender journey, a gender journey from hell, I would say. My parents had realized that I had begun to socially transition, and they became aware of the fact that I was biting my breasts. And so they made a decision. I was at college at this time, and they made a decision to basically send me off to study abroad in Israel. And, you know, it's interesting to me that their calculus was basically to think that a country that is unstable and prone to war would be a safer place for their daughter than an American college campus. So I ended up living there. And while my parents sent me to Israel so that I would discontinue my gender transition, I actually took it as an opportunity to live stealth or undercover, pretending to be a man. And I did so in the broader secular Israeli society. I did so also in the Palestinian territories. And for a while there, I also for a living cleaned houses of Orthodox Jewish families and basically LARPed as an ultra Orthodox Jewish guy. So I had this really insane, crazy life. And I was also an Israeli Palestinian peace activist. I was young and idealistic and naive, and I thought that peace was possible. I spoke English and Russian and Arabic, and then I picked up Hebrew so I could access these different sectors of the society. And I guess I was really, really idealistic. I had all these hopes and dreams, and it was really in the wake of I'd say two pretty significant terror attacks. That the first one that I lived through in May of 2021, it was 11 days of rocket attacks from Hamas. And it was in the wake of that that I began to question like the dogma and the ideology of the radical left. And that questioning process really spurred on, the algorithm sort of shifting the type of content that I was seeing. And so what started out as critiques of Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, which was indeed a year-long class I took during my last year of high school. Took a critical race theory class, 2016 to 2017. And so first this started, with the questioning of those ideas, and then it just sort of moved on to the algorithm showing me more and more content that was critical of the radical left, including some reaction videos that were, done by people who were commenting on Charlie Kirk's work, which is how I got in contact, with, or, which is how I learned about who Charlie Kirk was. And, so there was, and I was really compelled, I guess, by the way that he and a lot of other, conservative influencers were discussing these topics. But that alone, and that alone, like, didn't cause me to quit my gender transition. But it did lead me to content that was then critical of gender ideology more broadly. And so from then on, I went down a questioning process that was probably about a year and a half to 2 years, in which I was still very much like living my life, still as a trans person, still the type that goes undercover, like where basically no one in my life knew that I was a woman. And I continued to do that, even though I believed in what I was doing less and less and less. But it's like, how do you get yourself out of a situation like that when you're gallivanting around the Palestinian territories and everyone there thinks you're a guy? And if they were to find out the truth, bad things can happen to you. And so I was living this really risky life. And the longer I did it, those last couple of years, I kind of didn't believe in it anymore, but I just kind of felt like I was stuck. And then it was really like, you know, I'd say the biggest moment that sort of it basically acted as a catalyst for my detransition was probably living through the attacks on October 7th. Um, like I woke up to a siren. And at first, I guess I just thought they were testing the missile system because I was in Jerusalem and we didn't normally get rockets. Like all my experiences of rockets in Israel were when I was like visiting some friends or girlfriends or whatever in other areas. So it was I kind of didn't believe that it was actually real. But then I just kept hearing more sirens with like multiple explosions after all of them, and the ground was shaking. And like I realized that it was real. And from that moment, I had a very, very quick calculus that I needed to make. And that calculus was, do I squeeze myself into this breast binder that I've been using to masquerade as a man? And it takes a long time to get that thing on, especially if you're sweaty because you're nervous and you're scared for your life. It takes a very long time to get this thing on. So I had to make the calculus of like, do I put this thing on so that I can pass as a man in the bomb shelter, in the communal bomb shelter in a neighborhood where everyone knows me as a guy? Or do I make it into the bomb shelter in time? So when given the choice between identity and survival, I chose survival. And I just kept making that choice throughout the rest of the day. And I was just like running back and forth to the bomb shelter and then the apartment and the bomb shelter and the apartment. And you're like living in this horrific kind of purgatory because you never know when the next siren is going to come. So it's like your life is kind of on hold in some ways. And so like at first it was I mean it was terrifying. The whole day it was so deeply traumatic. I think that it was that final kind of nail in the coffin. But I did very viscerally and not just like intellectually understand, probably for the first time in my life, that like my female body is not a pathology that needs to be fought against and encumbered in a way that makes me less functional in terms of like, survival, right? Because when you're binding your breasts, you're not just squashing your breast tissue, you're also squashing your ribs and your lungs and your entire upper body and your musculature and your developing skeletal system. You're squashing all of it, and so of course it's quite difficult to breathe. And you know, when you can't breathe, you can't run fast enough. And that decision was kind of further reified for me when I started finding out that there were like, terrorists that were busting into the bomb shelters and killing people inside. And like, it was, I mean, it was just, there were so many things that happened for me psychologically that day. And I had some moments where I was basically like, if I survive today, if this is a day that I survive, I'm not going to continue living a lie that I don't believe in anymore just because it's like, inconvenient to try to undo it. Like it just felt like there was no point. So that's kind of, yeah, so that's basically my story in like a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a great point there. And I mean, I think there's something really interesting about the whole idea of in some societies, gender roles are so set, which is kind of a feminist point, actually, that you could just say you are a man and everyone would believe it. And I mean, we only have like an hour here, but it would be interesting to explore that at some point in the future. I mean, you were going to these Orthodox Jewish and maybe Israeli Arab homes, and I mean, I think you're about 5'2", 5'3", right? Like you're just sort of saying, yeah, hey, I'm a big dude, and everyone's like, well, of course he is. How could they? That's the rule. Women wear this. So I do think that's pretty funny. And I've heard buddies in the military say pretty much the same thing, that if you were a tough female army captain and you were wearing quote unquote men's clothes and you were negotiating in these societies, you'd just be processed as one of the boys. And sort of bad things would happen if someone crossed that mental barrier and was like, oh, that's not a man. Recognition happened if you're walking to wash up or something. But so Christy Kelly, I want to jump over to you here because you're a mom. We've talked a lot. You've sometimes mocked the callous attitudes of the guys on this panel toward family life and the like. What do you think about that comment from Maya that it was very much modern pop culture that kind of led to this? Like a college campus could be more dangerous than a war zone in terms of the modern gender or dating environment, or I got an iPad at 12 and that was really where I got a lot of these ideas. I mean, I saw your reaction to some of those things. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down two questions. I mean, my first question was, what was going through your parents' mind? What was the connection to send you, overseas to Israel versus, just thinking that would be a safer place for you? And then my other, question that I wrote down was the connection with autism and gender confusion. I have an Asperger's daughter, so it's like I realize and know, but a lot of people might not really know the connection between the autistic mind and questioning everything, especially when it comes to, your gender. So can you talk a little bit about maybe both of those?
Okay. Yeah. So to answer your first question of like what was going through my parents' minds, their main thing was like, we need to get you out of this college environment. Even though, of course, I was already ideating in this way since like, in the terms of transgender in this particular framework as a 12-year-old. So that, my own kind of questioning process far predated when my parents made this decision. And arguably, I was very confused about the fact that I was a girl, even before then, probably due to some of my developmental delays that I had a lot of as a kid. But I think their mindset was basically like, you know, all of these far leftist ideologies have just totally subsumed the West. So we can't send her to a Western country. We can't send her to an Anglophone Western country in particular. And I, of course, wanted to go to a country where I spoke at least like one of the languages, and I didn't want to have to rely on English. And so that would have left, the choice between like try to find some study abroad in Russia. I grew up speaking English and Russian, or I could go to Israel because I spoke not only English and Russian, but at that time Arabic. And then when I was there, I picked up Hebrew, of course. So, and the reason it was kind of, and then it was kind of up to me which country. And, I wanted to like, to be totally honest with you, I made that calculus because like I wanted to like date a bunch of women, and like in Russia, that probably would be a little bit harder to do. Especially if you express like an anti-Putin sentiment, which is basically the only time they'll actually try to like get you on that. It's a very like a lot of those laws in Russia are like very selectively enforced based on, whether you've spoken out against the regime or not. But, I just didn't want to deal with any of these complexities. I was like 19 and I was thinking like, what do I really want in life? Okay, my parents are gonna make me go study abroad in this other country. Could be a fun adventure. I had already been to Israel once because I was a pro-Palestinian campus activist, despite the fact that I'm a Jew, because I was studying Arabic in like a Qatari-funded Arabic program since I was 12. And I guess I like slightly fell in love with my Arabic teacher at the time. And because I wanted to impress her, I just kind of like internalized all of the Qatari messaging that she was sort of putting forth, about like Islamophobia and like, any critique of the Palestinians is going to be based in Islamophobia. So because I developed this entire like pro-Palestinian position, I was a campus activist and I was a Jew. The one of the Jewish organizations on campus actually like invited me to basically spend like a week with them at an institute in Jerusalem to study the conflict because they realized that I wasn't getting the whole story, and that trip changed my life, especially because I went with this girl I was dating at the time, and we extended our trip, and we went into the West Bank, and I already spoke Arabic, and so like I just had multiple instances that I've spoken about, in previous interviews, where I knew that I was being perceived as a man or as a guy rather, because I don't think I ever looked as like a man per se, maybe like a teenage boy. But I knew that I was being perceived in that way in those cultures, even without having to just roid myself up on high doses of testosterone. And so I was like, oh, this is actually perfect. Like, I need to pick a study abroad location because my parents don't want me to transition, but I've just found like the perfect place to do it. So, and I just don't think that it was I don't think that it crossed their mind actually that that country would be as, I guess, unsafe and unstable as it actually is. Because if you're Jewish and you have family in Israel, you kind of know that, okay, like rockets being shot at you are like something that people in that country just deal with. It's like, it's not a big deal. Like they didn't see it as a big deal. Of course, no one predicted October 7th was going to happen, which was like a level up in absolute horrifying insanity from any of the other like rocket attacks or terror attacks that I'd lived through over there. But so that was basically their mentality, as far as I'm concerned, was just to get me out of the West. And then in terms of the question of like, what explains why it is that there are so many autistic and ADHD young people who develop gender dysphoria or who have some type of transgender ideation or identification. This is actually something that I've been trying to explore on my Substack, which is also under the name Maia Poet, length. And like, I think there are so many reasons why autistic youth could get, youth with Asperger's specifically could get, could question their gender in this way or could have certain types of confusion that relate to their gender. I think it can actually basically be broken down by each autistic trait. Like, I think it is just every aspect of autism is its own predisposing factor. But I mean, if there are any specific ones that you'd like to highlight, since you do have a daughter on the spectrum, we might be able to narrow it down that way.
Yeah, I think I will definitely go check out your Substack. And I mean, I'm sure we could just talk about this for like hours on end,
Yeah.
right? But my daughter is, she's on the other side of the questioning phase, but I've just seen it not just, from her and her experiences, but many autistic youth and how it really does seem to be. And like you said, a lot of it is the fact that there are delays. There, developmental delays as well as speech delays and all sorts of things that they face. So I think it does track with Asperger's and also just questioning everything about oneself.
Isn't,
Yeah.
just to jump in for a second, isn't part of that also for either of you guys seeing things in really black and white terms? So
Mm.
this is something that people have told me that are kind of a bit spurgy on the male side. Like if you're told that like something is a female trait and you have that trait, you might just say, well, aren't I a woman? As opposed to saying, well, whatever, I'm clearly a guy, taking a more qualitative view. Is that real from you guys' perspective, or what do you think?
My
Or
perspective,
Maya, I guess. Yeah.
or
Mhm.
from Christie's?
Oh, go ahead,
Right.
Maya.
Yeah, I guess for you first.
Okay. Yeah, so the black and white thinking definitely contributes to it, as well as like the fact that autistic brains, especially the brains of like female autists, like a lot of girls, until very recently, girls just didn't get diagnosed with Asperger's. Like, I don't have an Asperger's diagnosis. I have diagnoses of ADHD and then of all these different developmental delays. I mean, I was a toe walker and they gave me Botox in my legs and put me in leg braces to try to fix that. I I learned to, I mean, I was reading medical journals for fun, like when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old about this one very rare brain tumor that I was obsessed with on the pituitary gland. And I was just so singularly fixated on that thing. And I was, just like constantly, I would use the word comorbidity in like casual speech in the beginning of middle school. So I was like very and systematizing. But I didn't learn to tie my shoes until I was 14. And I didn't learn how to swallow liquids properly also until I was 14. So, I mean, there were just a lot of delays going on there. And the black and white thinking, I would say, is certainly a part of it. And I think in terms of like female autists, part of how the autistic brain could be read by that very young, confused kid as being a male brain in a female body, which is kind of how I saw myself. I didn't think that I was literally a man or literally a boy, but I did think that like it doesn't make sense to have a brain like mine exist in a female body because I mean for so many different reasons, right? But one of the reasons was just that I mean, like especially around middle school, the rules of social communication just become infinitely more complex, especially with girls because they hit puberty first. And so they start relying on devices like sarcasm and like non-literal forms of verbal and nonverbal communication. So they communicate with one another in an extremely complex way that makes no sense if you don't pick up on like social cues or non-literal uses of language. Whereas the boys, just from an objective standpoint, as an autistic girl, are just like significantly easier to understand because they say words and they mean the words they say. And so
Yes.
so there's that.
Preach
There's
it.
that bit. And then like additionally, if you're if you're a lesbian like me, and then you start to like experience these like weird feelings around other girls, I actually I remember hearing about crushes, and I never really consumed fiction as a kid or talked about feelings with anyone because I really only cared about the rare brain tumor. Like that was it. It was that and cats. So I didn't talk about other things or think about other things, until that obsession morphed into an obsession with the human genome, and then with all these different learning disabilities, and then with like the different parts of the brain and their functions and whatever. But so I didn't communicate with other kids or peers in a normal way. So I thought that Crush was an orange soda because I saw it in a supermarket and the kids my age at that time were obsessed with like hot Cheetos. So I thought, okay, like, peer groups of kids can be obsessed with snacks and drinks, just like they can be obsessed with, wearing the same clothing, like all of them, and they just figure out somehow how they're supposed to wear, even though it's not written down in the school dress code, even though it's a school that doesn't have a uniform explicitly. All the kids around middle school, they just start the boys all dress the same and the girls all dress the same, and that confused me too. But like, when I started to experience all of these odd feelings around other girls, the flusteredness and all the rest of it, I definitely went to WebMD and tried to figure out what was ailing me, what illness I had fallen ill with. And so I determined that it was like either some kind of a stroke or some kind of neurological symptoms. And I
Wait,
actually had my
to pause
parents,
this for a second. When you first
yeah.
started falling in love and getting attracted to women, you thought you were coming down with something and you might be having a stroke? That's actually one of the best stories I've heard on the podcast. That so you went to WebMD and checked it out, like pulled
Am
it
I
up,
having a
and
stroke?
the symptoms like fluttering heart and so on were stroke
Yeah.
symptoms. That's really
Increased
cute.
heart rate, increased
Yeah.
perspiration.
All right.
Yeah. So it was either that or menopause. And I was like, okay, I'm too young for that because the hot flashes, right? So that's, so anyways, I was just confused about everything. Like there was basically nothing that I wasn't confused about at that age. And so like it did make, I was so flustered around these like specific other girls, they'd smile at me and then I would just have a stroke all over again. So I eventually, realized that if I guess that if I wanted to function better, if I didn't want to experience these illness symptoms, that I should just hang around the boys. Whereas previously, I kind of didn't particularly care about hanging around the other kids because none of them had any like new insights into the rare brain tumor I was obsessed with. So, and then the adults had kind of stopped indulging me or entertaining me or pretending to be interested at that point because they found it presumably annoying rather than cute and precocious at that age. So I decided, okay, like I should probably hang around, I'm going to hang around the boys. And so I think I identified very strongly with them. I mean, but in some ways, the boys didn't make sense to me either because they still have their own social behaviors. And those are just things that I tend to not intuit. But they certainly made significantly more sense to me than the girls did. And so when I stumbled across this framework, it really, I guess, put things into perspective for me. I mean, it gave me a framework for like, the framework it gave me was basically the like you have a male brain and a female body, and this is why you have a miserable experience in your body and a miserable experience in society. And I actually, before I encountered the framework of trans, I didn't think that I was having a miserable experience in society because though I was probably excluded and alienated in some ways, I just didn't pick up on it. So it kind of like rolled right off my back. But I did have a miserable experience in my body that has been with me ever since I was born because I was born prematurely. I've had all these developmental issues. And there was never there like I've every part of my body, I've had some kind of therapy on like every part of my body to fix some kind of delay. And my entire childhood was basically spent in different doctors' offices, trying to fix all these issues. And so, like, I would say that, those psychosocial experiences that most other kids have that teach them things about, reality itself in the world, I was, instead of being in those experiences, I was like in these medical contexts, basically, where there were always things wrong with me that needed to be fixed. And then when I hit puberty, I'd say, like, and I was young when I hit puberty, I was like 9 or 9.5. A lot of the like issues that I had, including my sensory processing issues, balance and kind of motor skill issues, they totally tanked. And at first, when I was reflecting back on this, I was thinking like, well, am I just confabulating this? Am I just imagining this? And so I decided to dig into it. And it turns out that like women during their cycles for about 2 weeks of the cycle are more prone to clumsiness and getting into accidents and falling down because apparently our balance is highly mediated by our hormones. So you take a kid who already struggles with motor skills and balance and has to be in occupational therapy and speech therapy and physical therapy just to figure out how to do the tasks that other people just learn to do normally with their development. And then you add this cascade of pubertal hormones to it. And then suddenly you don't have most of those skills anymore. And your body is changing. And your sensory processing issues are getting worse. So my experience in my body was demonstrably miserable. And I didn't know why. And so that's just like the most brief possible synopsis I could give you of like that overlap.
Fair enough. So, and yeah, that's a really interesting intro with some memorable lines therein. Brooks Crenshaw. So one of the things that I do want to get to today is we just saw the first detransitioner win in a U.S. court for $2 million. So I don't really know if there's an immediate segue into that from where I'm passing the ball now. But Brooks, what do you think? Any questions based on what we've talked about so far, or any thoughts on the first DT $2 million?
Well, so I do want to look
Terrible
forward
question for me
eventually
there,
in
but
this podcast. I do want to move to the future, but I'd kind of like to dig back into what you've already said, Maya, in terms of you mentioned a lot of of trouble in development across the spectrum there, but like puberty was a big factor. Would you say that did you come across the framework and then it occurred to you, or were you having those suspicions through puberty before you discovered the frame? Like, which is the chicken or the egg here in terms of how you ended up going down that road?
Really good question. I would say that I had questions or suspicions or confusion before puberty. I mean, so most kids develop an understanding of sex constancy, right? Or it used to be
Mhm.
called gender constancy, but which the trans activists have turned into gender identity as a thing that can be separable from your sex. So now the phrase that a lot of people in our circles tend to use is sex constancy, which is probably more accurate of a terminology, which is basically the idea that, like, it's like a kid usually between 5 and 7 understands that they are either male or female. They're a little boy or a little girl that will grow into a teenage boy or a teenage girl and then into a man or a woman, right? But like kids under that age, if you give a little like 3-year-old a Ken doll and you put Ken in a dress, the 3-year-old will probably think that Ken has become a girl because Ken is wearing a dress. So there's a development that happens there cognitively that coincides with the development of a child's logical reasoning skills or the emergence of their logical reasoning skills. So in my case, I don't think that I actually achieved sex constancy. I don't think I hit that milestone until, I mean, I started to develop pubertally, and my parents explained to me, what was going to happen. But I kind of thought that it was a joke. Like I didn't think they were being real. I thought that, they were, making it up or something. Like because you play imaginary games with your parents, right? And they were already, I think, trying to teach me the difference between things that were imagined and things that were real, because they also realized that I was not picking up on even that distinction at that age. And so I just, yeah, I don't know. But like, it seems like basically I was in denial about the fact that I was a girl, probably until I got my first period when I was like 10 and a half. So that was jarring to be kind of living in La La Land and
Mhm.
to not to have that level of confusion. But I seemed competent enough to the adults around me, because they didn't seem to be aware of the fact that I was this confused. But I also remember distinctly, the framework that I settled on before trans. I'd heard about it. I was listening to NPR on the way back home from school one day, and I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and they were talking about the subject of hermaphrodites. And they covered the story of this one woman who was basically, she was raised as a girl, but she had some kind of disorder of sexual development. And when she would change in the locker room, she would notice that there was something different about her from the other girls. But her parents had obscured her history from her. And she always knew that something was up. But she found out as an adult, basically, that her parents had hidden her entire medical history from her. And in that moment, I'd say that I became pretty paranoid that I was the same way and that my parents were hiding my medical history from me. I mean, I don't have an intersex condition, but that was the framework that I thought was accurate as an 8-year-old or 9-year-old. But the difference between that and trans is that, like, when I had those thoughts that, like, oh my gosh, this might be what's going on with me, you know? Um, when I started to have those thoughts, like, I didn't have an internet connected device where I could like autistically research it to death. And that was the difference.
Right.
That was literally the difference, I would say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, like, as a guy that was military intelligence and in the research field, like I've known a lot of autists in my peers, and one of the things that I've come to understand, and this might describe you, it might not, but like the idea of change. For instance, I have friends that if you move the desk in the room, you haven't moved the desk, you've changed reality, and it's very traumatic, right? Is that something you experience?
I would say I experienced that more in my own body than
Yeah.
externally, because I kind of, I mean, before I was medicated for ADHD, I lived exclusively in my head. Like I had very little understanding of the fact. I mean, I had this problem of walking into traffic all the time, because like the traffic light changing colors didn't interest me. But my theory about how to excise this rare brain tumor without harming the surrounding functions of the brain as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old was a far more gripping thought. So I just walk into traffic, right?
Sure.
And it would be that I existed on that level of functioning, just total disconnection from everything around me, except for like cats. Um, I was very connected to cats always, but um, that was how I lived until I was about 14. But I still in my body, like I do remember distinctly kind of like from the from my first memory of like looking in a mirror, like I remember being old enough to realize, wait, is this me? Like, is this actually me? Most infants figure it out, or toddlers figure this out. But I remember I was probably in like, I don't know, kindergarten or first grade. I mean, I went to a school that didn't have grade levels. So I'm guessing approximately maybe 5, 6 years old. And then from then on, whenever I looked at myself in the mirror, I would be like, wait, is that me? And it's like, I knew it was me, but it's like I changed subtly every single day and I could perceive that. And I didn't have in my mind's eye, I just never, I guess, imagined myself as the body containing the brain. I've always imagined myself like in my own self concept is basically just like brain that's like encumbered by an unbearable sensory environment that's like an onslaught of like hellish stimuli, and just trying to fend it off basically constantly. So I think that that is sort of I think that that might be another underlying mechanism here for some of these young people. But yeah, certainly a dislike of change, like is and a certain type of rigidity as well, cognitive rigidity yeah, you're correct that that's a factor.
So when you started to change, like is that a potential factor for you in terms of like when you started to move in that direction? That's what I was getting at from a puberty standpoint.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting in terms of some of the predictor variables that we actually see in the literature. Like autism is in there, ADHD is in there. Puberty is the big one for young women. I mean, I've obviously never experienced female puberty as a man, but even the male version where your dick starts growing, excuse me, and you grow a foot in height and hair starts sprouting on your body is pretty notable. I would imagine that as a woman, it's considerably more shocking. I mean, there are much more dramatic changes. Guys start looking at you. You wonder what's happening. So I mean, it wouldn't be surprising that if change itself is a trigger for a lot of things, that would create that sensation of, am I still who I used to be? Was I ever who I was? So on. And people describe that in writing in the qualitative portions of some of this. But Charles Love, Big Chuck, we welcome you to the podcast. We've talked about a bunch of things so far. One of our foci today is the first detransitioner win in court. We're obviously talking to our buddy Maia Poet, who we all know from social media, sometimes from real life. I think you guys have met. Do you have a question for the guests right now, based on anything we've chopped it up about so far?
Well, I would like to say hello, Maya. Good to meet you. That this is a first for me. So this may be. I'm pretty sure I was racking my brain. I think this is the first time that we had a guest that I did not know, did have very little background on, right? Didn't even know who was going to be the guest until I came on. So I said, let me find out who Maya is. And it kind of leads us to the verdict you want to talk about in the future shortly here, because I'm looking up. So I just Googled you. That's all I did. Just like, what are they going to say? And so I'm instantly taken to pages and articles and chats all about this evil grifter, right? So apparently you're a non-trans, faking to be trans, non-detransitioning grifter. And it made me think, but not in the way that they would think. Um, because I've been and we've had Luca Hine and we've had Chloe on, and I've been at an event with Chloe. And I think at the time Chloe was not quite 19, so she was probably 18 years old. And we're walking into this event. And this is probably not the most, but probably the second most number of activists and screaming protesters I had ever seen. She's the only speaker, so Trump's not there, nobody else. There's size, there's security ushering us into the room for this 18-year-old girl to speak her opinion. You don't have to agree with her or not, but I find it interesting that, love is love and gender is fluid and everything is whatever you feel like it to be. And the moment you turn on them, the knives come out, right? So they were ready to tear this little girl down. And so now they seem to be doing the same thing about you. I mean, talking about your mom, they got all these connections. And I'm thinking, one, so my first question would be, one, how much money does this grift make you? I want to know, do you have multiple, is it like BLM level? Do you
BLM
have
style.
multiple mansions? And then secondly, why is it that to their credit, let's be fair, to their credit, they did use your pronouns. And when they tore you down, they did say things like, I met them at a bar and they said that they were, and them went, and then them went. So that was a little confusing, but they were trying to be kind in that regard as they said that you were a horrible person and fake. But I want you to talk about that if you want to, but mostly about how the people, other detransitioners, or anybody, you could be not detransition, Buck Angel, not detransitioning, but still saying they're crazy and how they're attacked and they try to dismiss you. And if they're right, why would they need to do that?
Yeah. No, I mean, you ask very valid questions. Um, this so-called grift of mine, which is just, me making content on the internet and people who want to engage with it
Mhm.
um, and access content behind a paywall or free content or just engage with me in any capacity can do that, just like, with any other content creation on the internet is, I guess, what amounts to my grift, as they say. It's I wish it were more profitable. I wish it were more profitable. Um, every now and again,
Where
I
can
can buy
people find
myself
your
a
content to help you grift?
oh well, I am on
Just throw it across the
Substack.
screen.
Yeah, we'll
I'm
put
on
it up in the
Substack.
video. Okay.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I'm Maia Poet on Substack, and I do a lot of writing, and I make videos that are aimed at parents and clinicians and just anyone who's interested in like sort of I give like tips to families and to clinicians about how to navigate these types of situations because I think that parents are in a really tough spot when it comes to like how, how in the world am I supposed to guide my child through this? And there's like so much politically charged information out there. It used to be politically charged entirely on the trans activist side, but now there's this politically charged countervalence of like the gender critical movement. So you have all these political talking points, and none of them actually really materially help parents try to figure out like when this thing enters the family dynamic, that's when, it's the most important to sort of that's the most important relationship here is going to be the relationship between the parents and the kids. And there are so many different like, forces conspiring to tear away at that relationship once gender enters the picture. And arguably, even if gender doesn't enter the picture, like there's a certain ethos that I think has been spread by the far left, which is this ethos of like, if you like, if you don't talk about the Native American genocide at Thanksgiving dinner with grandma, you're complicit. Remember, I was a teenager, I'd hear these younger millennials like that was the thing that they were telling us as teenagers, and we're like, okay, so now we need to talk about the Native American genocide at Thanksgiving with grandma. Otherwise, we're basically like the ones who killed them. And then it escalated to if you like if you're basically if you have family members who don't agree or don't like this strategy to approaching, I don't know, Thanksgiving dinner, that you basically need to like slowly decrease your contact with them or cut them off if they can be like framed as racist or sexist or homophobic or misogynistic. So it's kind of a broader cultural trend that I see as like basically latching on to extreme American individualism, like the most extreme of American individualism combined with this like radical left ideology. It seems like that's the force that is really like regardless of gender or not, that tears apart a lot of families just totally unnecessarily. But once gender enters the picture, and then there are all these, you know, scary statistics, and depending on which side of this you stand on, you're going to see scary statistics. Either you're going to see the scary statistic of like the suicide rate for like the non-affirmed, trans kids, and those suicide, statistics are obviously a lie, and they've been discounted, and shown to have been based on the same shoddy methodology as like everything in gender medicine and in gender ideology more broadly. But then if you're on the gender critical side, and you're, or you're kind of critical of like, okay, maybe this is just a thing my 12-year-old is going through that they need to be guided out of. Maybe this is just a phase. If you have that inclination, and you're more likely to find the gender critical content that now exists on this that didn't used to exist when I was going through this as a 12-year-old. And so my parents had to try to figure out how to parent me through this all alone, with no guidance. Then those parents are going to see all of these, scary like statistics and lists of medical harms that their kids are going to be subjected to. And so regardless, it causes families to panic. And either they panic and they affirm, or they panic and they just are like, you know what? No, this is stupid. We're not doing this. You're a girl, you're a boy. We're not going to talk about this. And I think that both of those approaches actually harm the young people involved. I think that rejecting, just automatically, or affirming automatically, can both be destructive, and both still lead the kid into the gender clinic anyways, like the moment they turn 18. And so I try to help families like not panic as much when this type of stuff enters their dynamic. And and a lot of the sort of things I write about and the type of content creation I do is very much aimed at basically helping parents of like kids who have traits of autism or ADHD to kind of decode what the hell it is their kids might be going through, or saying through a gender ideological script, but that there might be other sentiments that the kids are like incapable of actually articulating due to like a social communication delay, for instance. That's sort of what I do on the internet. And I write about all sorts of things, and try to slice and dice this phenomenon in a lot of ways. But to answer the question of like, why would they come after you if they're the ones that are in the right? I think what it really comes down to is that like gender ideology didn't capture institutions because it won a series of Oxford debates, right? It captured these institutions because it did so due to like basically threats and coercion, because they couldn't win in the marketplace of ideas. And there's been a long-standing academic push for this type of like, postmodernism, and that's mixed with like, it's like a neo-Marxism that's mixed with postmodernism rather than materialism, which original Marxism would have had. So it's actually even worse than what Marx came up with. What this modern kind of iteration is like significantly worse than whatever Karl Marx could have dreamed of creating ideologically. And because it's been able to get its way into all these institutions, basically, with like ideological violence and coercion and threats that if you disagree, you're going to lose your job. We're going to, dox you and your kids and make it impossible for anyone in your family to have a future. Like this type of like authoritarianism is precisely how these ideas made their way into the zeitgeist, to the point where now you have all these kids being like, oh yeah, this is something that I need to do. Right. So like so it's not that these ideas, got into the zeitgeist because they were correct. Because if that were true, then the activists that are trying to rail against me and against any other detransitioner or hell, the same abuse that they would put someone like me or Chloe through, they're also going to put transsexuals like Buck Angel through a very similar type of abuse, because all of us are gender heretics. All of us. The dogma goes that if you say you're trans, then you are trans. Right? And so trans kids are who they say they are, until, of course, you detransition, and then it means that you were somehow never trans, right? But they claim it's a medical condition or psychiatric condition that needs to be treated with like all these interventions that don't actually address the organ where there is an observable pathology, right? You can't excise feelings, negative feelings from breasts. So it's a flawed treatment model. It's treating feelings as if they're malignant tumors, feelings cancer, as my friend Exelanzic, who's another content creator and detransitioner, she's termed it feelings cancer for this reason, because that's how medicine treats it.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's just all these emotional pretenses, and there's no one unifying transgender ideology. There are so many different iterations of it. There's like the old school transsexualism, and then there's like this new non-binary kind of postmodern gender situation. And because it's all totally incoherent, because you've got so many different ideologies, like social justice ones, postmodern ones, radical feminist, or not radical feminist, but like liberal feminist. And you got all sorts of different ideologies, basically, and then techno-medical ideologies as well. And the way that, because there were some clinicians like 100 years ago who were doing these experiments in Europe, and the way that what these clinicians saw that their goal was in terms of treatment of the patients was also very much informed by what the patients were saying they were doing by desiring or undergoing all these body modifications. So it ends up being this really messy situation that amounts to a worldview that is premised upon inherently shaky bases. And as a result, if you tap even one of those with like a tampon, the entire stack of cards comes falling down, and they just don't know how to handle the dissonance.
And that's probably why censorship is so necessary. While we were talking about this, actually, I pulled up a message to me, and I think maybe also to Brooks in a thread on Twitter yesterday. Someone says, this person calls themselves the Mad Moth, and what they say is, what we need more of is empathy. Now, scum like you is why this country is garbage, Wilfred. You should die. You should kill yourself. Now, these are three different tweets, so it's
how did I miss that, Will?
I don't know, but it's just so like it's me saying one thing, then it's their main thing is like scum like you, garbage, you should kill yourself. But I mean, like the famous old line from I think Galileo actually is like the censor doesn't rant and scream when they know they have the right argument. Then they debate. They rant and scream when they know they're probably wrong. When they know the sun doesn't orbit the earth. They're just reasons that they want to keep saying that. And last thing before I actually want to flip to the entire panel and ask you guys a question. But Maia, something you said that's really interesting actually is for a lot of things like gender dysphoria, probably also ADHD, like a lot of mental conditions, it probably would be pretty easy to do some kind of professional brain scan and see, does this actually exist? Every really competent doctor I know has pointed this out over a couple scotches. We don't do this for a reason. And I think the reason is that we would find out pretty rapidly that 95% of people don't have any kind of mental disability. Like there are really people on the spectrum, but almost no one in like the Stanford Disability Office really has like such severe OCD that they can't take exams. So like everyone knows this, that's the elephant in the room. But okay, we've got maybe 10, 15 minutes left. I actually want to ask all of you guys a question or two as opposed to just chopping it up back and forth. Well, like I said at the start of the show, one of the news headlines that Maia pointed out that we were going to discuss is we just saw the first real verdict in favor of a detransitioner. And it's also interesting, by the way, the like quasi-grifter attack. Like, what is a detransitioner? She only tied the top of her body down for 5 years. That's not good enough. There's all this infighting on the right and the left. It's just crazy. But anyway, so someone won $2 million. I think it's 400,000 from the plastic surgeon and 1.6 million from the shrink that told them that everything that they thought about the necessity of changing their body was correct. By the way, I thought that was really important. But to go kind of around to everyone, probably ending with Maia, Christy Kelly, as a mom, as a lawyer and academic, what do you think about this? Does this spell the end of the whole trans phenomenon that now, at least in red states, these doctors can be fined 2-3 million? How big is this?
Wait, did
What's
you say red state? Because I think that was New York. Was
Oh,
it
even
not?
better. Yeah, my fault.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
was
I
gonna
was
ask
like,
Okay.
what state
Hell,
was that
everywhere
out
then.
of?
Boom. But okay, yeah. I mean, so yeah, you can the doctor can be sued, civil case, 2 million minimum.
Mhm.
Christy, how big is this? Is trans over?
I mean, if this stands, right, because we know it's probably going to face an appeal. So if it stands, if it doesn't, die on appeal and get rolled back, I think that hopefully it is going to be like a bomb that went off, especially where psychologists are concerned, because they're definitely going to be thinking about their bottom line and their culpability for the way that these cases are treated. So hopefully, let's see if it holds. I would be surprised if it doesn't get rolled back at least a little bit. Personally, I will. I mean, I hope not. But let's see if it holds. If it's definitely going to open up the floodgates for tons of cases to start rolling in.
Yeah, I know Chloe is suing herself, actually. Like a couple of people that we're friendly with are. Charles Love, what do you think? Is this the end of the trans phenomenon? You can actually take the doctor to the woodshed, hit him for 3 or 4 million, or her. Keep
God,
the
I
teats.
wish. No, you know what? It's a move in the right direction, but the problem is going to be crazy always fights to the end. So they're probably going to get more rabid as these things come up because they're going to see that, this, whether it holds up on appeal or not, it's going to be kind of a watershed moment, and they're going to be trying to fight back as much as they can. And keep in mind, there's another shoe to drop. At some point, we're going to have the craziest June ever. Have you all seen the Supreme Court docket? This June is going to be like you think Trump is causing issues. Wait till they come down with the decisions on these cases, and Tennessee being one, right? So you're going to have parental rights versus what the doctors can do. So if everything goes the same way, then maybe. But even if that happens, the crazy gonna do what the crazy gonna do. So that's just gonna make them fight even more. So is it over? Not quite yet. But I mean, it's good to see. And like I said, I just verified. I thought maybe I was wrong. It was Westchester County, the
Huh?
Westchester County Supreme Court.
Yeah,
So
no.
right. So imagine, like you said, what it's going to portend in the red state. So even if it doesn't work everywhere else in California and everybody, they all bring their top lawyers to kind of fight this. That's going to give incentive to people in all the purple and red states to kind of bring these cases. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. Brooks Crenshaw, what do you think? Are we seeing the end of the trans kids phenomenon?
So I think this is largely an overlap between ideology and profit motive, right? Like this was a perfect storm with
Mhm.
the healthcare industry and the merging of ideology. And do I think it's over? Um, could be this round, but like I tend to view this in warlike terms, right? With my background, so like I view the trans issue as the key weapon of queer theory in the moment, in the sense that queer theory's objective is to demolish all societal norms on principle. And so trans was really effective in breaking down societal norms, whether you're talking about women's sports, whether you're talking about public restrooms, whether you're talking about and also the family issue, right? What Maya already mentioned was that you had these families demolished, and that's a big deal because like once trans is in the family, you got two camps in that family, right? That family's divided down the middle, right? And this is like then the question comes down is what is truth, right? This is a very biblical a concept of I come not to bring peace but a sword. It will divide households, and I can go to Thanksgiving dinner and say what is a woman, and the room goes right. And so that's been very effective for the ideologues with regard to critical theory. I think they will likely find something else to use to great effect. I don't know what that is. If there is the opportunism of profit motive tied to it, it will be as bad as the trans issue has been. I don't know if we're going to see this recur intergenerationally, like we, would see, say, anorexia or other such. So I don't know. But I would submit that if trans is over, the ideology continues on, and it will find other weapons to wage war with.
It's a really good line. I'll actually use my little piece to respond to it. Like, as most of you guys know, I used to actually be an activist for the Human Rights Campaign because I actually support gay marriage, like basic gay rights. That's like 10, 15 years ago. And I consider this to be like the last civil rights struggle. So we got like basic gay rights, like Equality Illinois. I think civil unions, Obergefell was on the horizon. And everyone was just like, hell yeah, this is a win. Equality. I mean, most people quit and went back to college. And didn't expect to get another human rights campaign fundraising brochure as a naive ass grad student. It was like, okay, everyone's equal right now, black, white, gay, straight, whatever. No more of this damned whining. Next year, transgender. It was the next campaign popped up in the mail. And I think that it is very likely we're going to see something like that. The only issue is that eventually you do run out of civil rights movements. Like, everyone pretty cool with first wave feminism, women can vote. When you go down from that all the way to like Charles is like, I don't know about it. Look what they're doing. But I mean, but when you go down from that to like rights for sex offenders or something, I think a lot of people start jumping off the bus. Like, not everything is equal. Not all rights campaigns are equal. But all right, Maya, what do you think? Is this a major blow against the whole youth gender industry? Really, hundreds of clinics, all that.
Doesn't Christy need to go first?
Christy, yeah, Christy was the first person.
You gotta
I wanna-
follow the rules.
Oh,
Look at
okay.
that.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. So, do I think that the youth gender medicine is over? No. No. I don't think the trans phenomenon is anywhere near over. I think that this is clearly a step towards sanity. But if you look at the reason why, basically why they ruled in favor of Fox Varian, it was on the basis not that what was done to her was illegitimate, not that it was fraudulent, but that it was malpractice. Right? So this verdict was made on the basis of like the doctor and the therapist, they had a job to uphold a certain standard of care that involved like properly vetting for mental health issues and like for all the rest of it, there was a standard of care that they failed to meet, rather than obviously one which attacks the fundamental premises of youth gender medicine, which has been practiced for the better part of like 3 decades now, starting in the Netherlands in like the mid 90s with as far as the puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2, and then followed up by cross-sex hormones and surgeries where necessary or where relevant, like in the cases of the boys. And one of those Dutch kids like died on the operating table because he didn't have the penile skin, and so they had to resect something from the colon for the lining of the canal, I guess we'll call it. And it went septic, and he died, and he was an otherwise healthy Dutch teenager. So, I mean, that didn't stop them. Again, that didn't stop the practices in the Netherlands. That didn't make them think twice about anything because they thought that they had selected the right patients based on a totally fraudulent way of like measuring gender dysphoria, and based on the fact or the like the statements made by older male transitioners who were basically talking about how hard it is for them to pass as women, which is why the mental health outcomes that these researchers like expected to see in the transsexual adults, like the outcomes were not what they expected to be, you know? And so that's why they started going to doing this to kids. And when it didn't work for the kids, when it didn't work for the adults, they started, moving younger and younger and intervening in the bodies of these kids, under the same premise that basically like, okay, well, there are these transsexual adults, right, who benefit from this treatment, but they weren't able to substantiate which types of benefits or measure them objectively. So the whole thing is on shaky ground. And upon that shaky ground, they're like, well, the problem is not that like maybe we were wrong when we thought that just like cutting off people's body parts is going to like ease their psychological distress in the long term, because of course our bodies and our minds are connected. And if you're having these crazy post-surgical issues and a loss of function, then of course, like, even though you might think, I really hate my penis, for example, I hate it and I want it off my body, it's like, it's one thing to have that thought, and then it's another thing to deal with the embodied reality of having urological issues or pain or a total lack of sensation, right? So like they basically tried to explain away psychologically, why this protocol would work for the adults. It didn't work for the adults as well as the researchers had hoped. They said this is no panacea. They were kind of honest about it. But then when it came to, doing these types of interventions on kids, the studies were really flawed from the outset. But then when they would start to, like, when this protocol in the Netherlands was brought to the United States, by Norman Spack of Boston Children's Hospital, it wasn't brought to the United States even after the first Dutch follow-up study had showed that this was some kind of a success. So it's basically just a bunch of doctors who want to do experiments. And a lot of them, I would say, are genuinely well-intentioned. Or at least some of them, maybe not a lot, but some of them do seem to genuinely believe. They have a very strong feeling. It's a very strong vibe they have that transitioning kids, or the majority of the adults that they transition, and there used to be guardrails back in the olden days that there aren't now. But it's basically what has been practiced up till this point is vibes-based medicine rather than evidence-based medicine. And to presuppose such intense, radical, invasive treatments is like without any evidence, and then to just kind of keep trucking through. And instead of now, like, the purpose of these transgender things, these operations and modifications, the purpose is no longer actually to alleviate gender dysphoria, right? Because it's basically it's not alleviated in every case, right? And then they attribute it to like minority stress. The goal now has shifted once the evidence has shifted itself to not be able to substantiate the claim that this is a valid like medical treatment for a type of psychological distress in most or all of the patients that are being put through this pathway. And so now the entire rationale why these clinicians are doing this to people is that it's about embodiment goals. So, like, if you're a cis woman, so a woman who doesn't think she's a man, but you want to take testosterone, go for it. If you want it, if those are your embodiment goals, go for it. You don't have to have any distress. If you want like heart-shaped nipples or Christmas tree-shaped nipples or no nipples or extra big scars, then that's fine. We can do that, right? So they're not even trying to like. There's no pretense of this old school transsexualism. And furthermore, the parents like all over Reddit and Discord are like panicking. The parents who have like socially transitioned their 2 and 3-year-olds back when this was being told is, just 7 or 8 years ago, they were being told that this is a very good idea and that you need to socially transition your toddlers. Otherwise, they'll become adolescents who become suicidal. Now these little toddlers from 7 or 8 years ago are on the cusp of puberty. And now the puberty blockers that they were told, they don't have any memories even of being raised as their sex. They don't have memories of that time. So, and they've been told ever since they were little kids that like little boys have been told, yeah, you're actually a girl. And, when you go through puberty or before you go through puberty, there are going to be these drugs that we can give you that will stop your body from developing into a man's body. And so now all of that is being pulled out from under them, and nothing is being put in its place. So these parents are now scrambling to figure out how to source hormones, cross-sex hormones, or something that could block puberty that isn't Lupron for their kids. They're figuring out black and gray market ways to do it. So like I just think that we're nowhere near done, because this entire field of medicine has gone beyond a laboratory. It's gone into the pop culture, into the zeitgeist. These medical, interventions like breast binders or even hormones, you can just get on the internet. And the idea still remains in the minds of so many families as something that like they need and their kids need to do. Otherwise, they will literally kill themselves. So I think we're going to be in this for another few decades if we stop presenting this as an option to like the next generation of kids. Then we basically have to wait for this generation who has been indoctrinated, for lack of a better term, to kind of like grow up, and then to just stop continually indoctrinating more kids. So we're going to be in this for a long time.
Well, what you just described in passing, you know, it was reminiscent to me of something that was happening in the 90s that was, you know, just body mod, right? Just you'd have people that were getting horns on their head and becoming cats and having like the whiskers put it. And this was like a weird type kink fetish thing that was over here, and it's kind of been brought into the mainstream via this channel, and there's definitely profit tied to it, and the customer journey, right? There's this much money in the lifespan of the patient slash client. Yeah, that sounds like body mod and kink brought to the mainstream. That's an interesting observation.
So
with regard to nipple shapes and whatnot.
So there's still some challenge out there, definitely. The pressure of the Christmas tree nipples may remain. Hopefully we can keep this away from the kids at least. One very quick final line. I do think, Maya, one of the people that are going to fight the hardest against this are the parents that did this to their kids. I think like we all kind of know that if you're a mom, you socially transitioned your son at 3 because some jackass on Reddit told you to. You're now looking for gray market Chinese hormones. I mean, like you are going to fight to the end. And your story is going to be straight up like Ice Watch fighter in Minneapolis. Like you are the good guy. You are fighting evil. But on that note, I think many people feel that way on the other side with perhaps more justification. Thanks to Maia Poet for jumping on. For Christy Kelly, Brooks Crenshaw, and Charles Love, I'm Will Reilly. This is Cut the Bull Podcast.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the U.S. of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.